actually got bored with academia, I would say, because I'd always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I left in 1999 and set up a company in Silicon Valley. Was funded by VCs, learned a lot, went through heaven and hell, I guess, through that startup. Did well, did poorly, did well, and then almost lost my shirt. Set up another company after that, which did well. And that was a strategy consulting organization called InnovaStrat, Innovation and Strategy. And I was fortunate to work with some of the leading companies in the US. I was invited by the board of directors in many of these companies. Alcoa, FedEx, a great program, a project with Harley Davidson for a whole year, implementing sustainable strategies for them. And then Intuit, where I represented the IT department and the next generation business infrastructure, Puma, and a number of other companies, HP, and so on. And all this while, I also was very interested in this whole notion of sustainability, and ended up doing a lot of research and publications in it. Wrote a couple of papers in the Harvard Business Review. Both of them became the cover stories. One in particular, I think, had an impact. And that was co-authored with the late Professor C.K. Prahalad, who became my mentor. This is about a couple of years before he passed away. And there was a big influence on me. And for the past, ever since the late 1980s, I'd also been very interested in ancient Indian wisdom and ancient Axial Age wisdom. That includes ancient Greece, Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and so on. And that led to a book called Two Birds and a Tree, where I applied some of these leadership principles from ancient civilizations, along with research in psychology and management, to describe how companies and leaders could really transform their organizations. And that led to my coming back to India in 2015. And I started another company, Academy of Innovation Management, which was all about digital transformation and leadership. And if I can request people not to, yes, I have set it up, please not scroll on the slide, if you can, not mark on the slide. And so, yes, so I came back, worked in digital transformation, joined ISP 2 years ago in January 2019. Here at ISP, I'm a clinical professor of organization behavior. I teach leadership, a lot of the leadership courses. I also occasionally teach strategy, innovation, and digital transformation. So that's my background, about 10 to 15 years in academia, 10 years or so in entrepreneurship, 10 years in large companies, either consulting for them. I was also the chief operating officer of a company. And so a mix of different backgrounds. So with that, let me move on to a quick overview of the general management program. I won't spend much time on it, but let me just describe what this is. You've already been introduced to it, but I'll just give you a minute. So this is a program on managerial effectiveness. It's 9 months in duration, and it'll be about 150 hours in live sessions and on your own learning for about 75 hours. It'll be a blend of online and in-person. It starts July 15th, a couple of months from now. And ideally, you have quite a bit of experience. I see many of you have many years of experience, but we expect at least 5 years of experience in it. And there are several modules, actually 12 modules. Modules 1 to 6 are sort of the functional areas, the core areas of management. That's decision-making, marketing, business analytics, value creation and finance, supply chains, and customer centricity. These are some of the most critical topics for many of you. To become an effective leader, these are critical topics. There'll, of course, be an action learning program. And before these modules, we'll have also CEO talks talking about particular areas. There'll be quite a few of those kinds of presentations and talks. And then we'll move on to some of the more, you could say they're the softer skills, the interpersonal skills, equally critical to the domain skills that you saw earlier. And Anup, you have some questions. So I'm not going to answer those questions. Shruti, the questions you have in terms of assignments and appear for GMAT, please direct them to Anita. So the administrative and operational questions, please direct them to Anita. So here I'll mostly focus on my particular research and work, but I'm sure you have a lot of questions. Please send them to Anita. She'll be happy to answer them for you. Modules 7, 8, 9, these are all about new technologies, negotiation. Growth is, of course, a critical topic, affects every company. We also, on the soft skills side, it's critical to understand how to communicate in terms of storytelling and your own presence. Module 11 is on leadership, which I teach. It's all about self-leadership or personal leadership. And as I mentioned, there'll be ALP, action learning projects, and your final presentation. So really, it's a mix of domain-specific skills in functional areas, as well as these interpersonal skills, what's called soft skills, emotional intelligence, group intelligence, all these different terms that have come up now. So this is the program for you, 12 different modules, an extensive program spread over 9 months with several faculty, a number of faculty. Many of the faculty here at ISP have had their PhD abroad. So we come from, so mine was, as I mentioned, UCLA. We have some others who've been also from UCLA. So many come back to India and continue to do their research here as well as teach. And many of us also consult and work in corporations. And Anita and VK mentioned to you, we emphasize here at ISP what's called pracademics, practical applications as well as academia. So practice, insights and practice informed by research. And ISB does more research than all the other business schools in India combined in terms of publishing in the A-level journals. So here in ISB, it's particularly rigorous. We have to do extensive research in A-level journals as well as teaching and consulting. So with that as an introduction, let me move on to the masterclass itself. The masterclass is about leadership, and in particular, the imperatives of leadership excellence. These are the 6 takeaways you can expect from this through different sections. The first is I'll introduce to you a 3-level leadership model that I've developed in my 20 years in industry, and before that, the 15 years in academia. This is a model that I have lived by and practiced, and I hope to share it with you, all about leadership excellence. The second one is a process that I've myself used and implemented in a large number of companies called the real leadership process, recognition, experience, anchoring, and leadership by example. It's also the book itself. The book was about this process. And then I'll introduce the concept of beingful leadership, which I've been developing in the last 5 years or so, but thinking about for the past 25 years. And beingful leadership, I believe, is especially relevant for times like this, pandemic times when there's a lot of uncertainty. And our own psychological well-being is very critical. And we need that grounding to thrive in a world that is turned upside down. And then I'll also talk about happiness and meaning. Many of us pursue happiness, but the research indicates, and my own experience indicates, it's better to pursue meaning. That happiness, the direct pursuit of happiness actually leads to unhappiness. So I'll show you some of the research on that and why meaning really matters, meaning and engagement at work. Then that's a segue into the concept of beingful work, where it's work that fulfills your whole self needs. So how do you find that kind of work? How do you enable that kind of work in organizations is something that I'll discuss, where meaning, engagement, and expressing your authentic self at work, that becomes very important. And I'll then talk about the impact of all this on our well-being. So this is leadership from the perspective of ourselves. There are many other aspects of leadership, but this particular masterclass is about self-leadership, which I call beingful leadership. I also teach a number of other leadership courses, but that's too much to cover in these 2 hours. But the reason why I picked this is that in these COVID times, if I can again request everyone to mute their microphones, especially welcome. Thank you very much, please. And the reason why I picked this particular theme in terms of well-being, let me again, if I can ask Anita to mute welcome. All those who are unmuted, if I could request, good, Anita, please mute them. Thank you all very much. So the reason why I picked well-being is this is absolutely critical for us in these difficult times. How can we ensure our well-being? And how can we ensure the well-being of the people who work with us, our team members, the people who report to us, and so on. So that's going to be a big theme here, and that's the data that I'll show to you. So the insights will be all about leadership, meaning, being authentic at work, the engagement that you have at work, and the relationship to well-being. So that's the particular theme of this masterclass. It's only a portion of all of leadership. So let me just quickly move to section 1, which is all about leadership foundations. Let me ask you, before I begin to talk about leadership, what are the leadership challenges you're facing? Perhaps the top 3 leadership challenges that you're facing professionally today. And that'll help others also to know what you're facing. All of you have, as I can see from who you are, perhaps have significant responsibilities. So what are the top 3 leadership challenges that you face? Go ahead and use the chat box. I just want to get a sense of what is it that you're grappling with. And then I'll get to the question of personal, but let's begin with professional leadership. And encourage all of you to look at the chat box to see if these are themes that resonate with you. Motivation, and that comes up repeatedly, training and aligning. Yes, the challenge of micromanagement, engaging people towards goals, aligning people towards goals. Absolutely. Getting along with the head of department. I'm assuming you're an academic. Anup, I'm assuming you're an academic or working in academia. Micromanagement, yes. How not to micromanage, or how to deal with a boss who micromanages, or how to deal with a subordinate who micromanages. I see issues of alignment repeatedly. Yes, turnaround, yes, and that's a particular kind of challenge. Aligning people with goals, that theme comes up repeatedly. How do you align? How do you incentivize? Empowerment, communication, sustainability, very interesting. Strategic thinking, setting the right expectations. Mental well-being, Rajesh, absolutely. That's something that's central to all of leadership now, to be concerned about the well-being, the mental well-being of our team and our group. Team spirit, yes, how do you create that team spirit? Dealing with conflict, yeah, absolutely, that comes up. And emotional health, and so on. Okay, and so I see, Kunal, you've mentioned employee retention, which means motivating them, giving them work that is meaningful to them. So many of these at a root level go back to how do you get employees and your teams to really be engaged in their work, to really be motivated. So once they're motivated, then alignment becomes easier, dealing with them, and conflict reduces. So at a foundational level, it's about motivating people, motivating your team and yourself, let me add. Keeping employees happy, absolutely. Happiness will be one of the well-being variables or constructs that we'll be looking at, Mamta. Okay, and leading by example. Monitoring work from home performance. I will not deal directly with that. That's a whole different topic. Structuring innovation. Okay, so primarily I'll be dealing with issues of motivation and alignment and finding a purpose, which is one of the things that comes up repeatedly here. I won't be able to address all your issues, clearly, because that requires a whole course on leadership. Let me then ask you, what are the personal challenges you're facing? And when I say leadership, your self-leadership challenges. What are the challenges you're facing personally to motivate yourself or to lead yourself? What are your personal leadership challenges? Okay. Happiness, personally being happy, managing your time, managing your emotions or the emotions of others, being my best self. That's very interesting, Venkat, being your best self. Let me just ask, Venkat, if you can unmute yourself and tell me what you meant by that. The whole notion of the best self is something that I'll get to. It's a very interesting one. What did you mean by that, Venkat? Please go ahead and unmute yourself. The best self at work or the best self in life? Go ahead, Venkat. And that's the gentleman who put the comment about best self. I'll occasionally call upon you to just express yourself, use the microphone. And I hope others don't feel left out if I just call upon a few people, given our time and the number of people we have here. Go ahead, Venkat. What did you mean by that? And you can unmute yourself directly. Frank, is it Frank Ripley? Okay. Disconnect office from home. Anger management. I know that's very interesting. And so what I'll be talking about indirectly helps in anger management. Yes, that's an issue many of us have. I've had that issue, especially 20 years ago. It was a major challenge for me. And I'll talk about how I managed to deal with it. Not fully. There's still a lot of challenges there, but at least partially. Emotional quotient. Absolutely. Okay, stay focused on a larger vision for yourself, a larger purpose for yourself, I'm assuming. And then self-control, absolutely. And that's something I'll be talking about. Self-control and anger management and so on are all very related. So self-control is going to be a big theme of what I'll be talking about. Who I am, of course, is the overarching theme of this. There will not be an answer to it. If only one could answer it in 2 hours, it would be wonderful, but at least you'll start thinking about it. I will be bringing in the Upanishads on that. How to reach self-expectations, yes, which also leads to disappointment and unhappiness, taking risks. Okay, to be or not to be, Vikas. Yes, I will just be talking about the to be part of it. Okay, with that, let me begin. So I have a sense now of the kinds of issues you're dealing with. Thank you for that, getting work thoughts of enduring trips. Okay, yes, Pratik. Yes, how to separate work from home. That's clearly a very big challenge, and I'll discuss what has helped me and what has helped many of the people who've taken my programs. Clearly, the difference between self-management, personal leadership, and professional leadership is blurring now. As we work from home and as these lines get blurred, personal leadership and professional leadership are very related. So I'll be talking about that. So here's the definition of leadership I'll be taking. There are many ways to look at leadership, but I'll constrain myself to this definition: inspiring and mobilizing people to create sustained value, something that is meaningful and something that's sustained. And all this is being done in the presence of tremendous change in the ecosystem. And let me know if you can all hear me clearly. If there's any problem in that, please let me know. If you're unable to hear me clearly, let me know. I'm assuming it is fine with you. So the three elements here is all about inspiring and motivating and mobilizing people. The second key theme is creating meaningful value or sustained value. And the third is all this is taking place in a disrupted world, which is the world we live in currently. Tremendous changes to the ecosystem. And so in my experience and the work that I've done with companies and the research that I do, it helps to think in terms of three levels of leadership. When you think of yourself and transforming your business, transforming yourself also, it helps to think of three levels. Level three is what many people talk about. It's all about strategy and business models. That's strategic leadership. That's the typical bread and butter of many leadership programs, and that will not be the bread and butter of today's program. That's a very common theme. In the program that you'll be working with, the GMP, that will be a big important theme, strategic leadership. That's level three. And a lot of my work, the HBR work I was talking about, was at that level. But I've realized, 20 years ago, I've realized that that is only the tip. That if, the well-known saying that something eats strategy for lunch, and that is culture. Level two, eat strategy for lunch. You can have the best strategy in the world, the best business model in the world, but that is all useless if you don't have the right culture and the work processes in place. And that's something that entrepreneurs have learned many times, and businesses learn all the time. So that's why level two is very critical. And level two is a big driver of level three, and that's about work processes and culture. That is more the process side of it, not the structure side of it. That too has been an area of work for me for many years. And I'll be talking about that. When I talk about meaningful work, that's what I mean. When I talk of leadership, I talk of culture and so on at level two. So that will be a theme in today's talk. But I've also learned in the last 10 years that even that is insufficient. If culture eats strategy for lunch, then mindsets and the sense of self really eat culture for breakfast. That's I guess, a cliche that I'm not a particularly bright cliche, but that's what I use. And that's level one. So level one is all about the leadership mindsets and the sense of self, as well as your team members' mindsets and sense of self. And that's my area of work currently. I believe from all my experience that that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's where the real challenge is. It's simply filled with metaphors today, but yes, so I'll talk about level one to begin with, and then move up to level two. I will not be talking about level three. But this is a helpful way to think of your own capabilities at level one, level two, level three. And recognizing that level one drives level two and level two drives level three. There is some reverse effect, of course, but the primary drivers are your mindset drives the kind of culture you participate in and contribute to. That in turn drives what kinds of strategies can be implemented. So starting with level one, so that's the first section of this talk. I'll spend about 20 minutes to half an hour on it. This is why I became fascinated with level one. Level one is all about mindsets and your sense of self. And ancient wisdom has a lot to say about your sense of self. If you want to create a mindset that is open and growth-oriented and receptive and inclusive, then you need to change the sense of self, of yourself and the people who work with you. And that's a big learning from ancient wisdom. Transform your sense of self, expand your sense of self. And that's the name of that book, Two Birds in a Tree. And let me just quickly ask you on chat. Here is a verse from the Mundaka Upanishad. This is perhaps the oldest, this first appeared in the Rig Veda, picked up in the Mundaka Upanishad, the Katha Upanishad, Shvetashvatara Upanishad, picked up in ancient Greek wisdom also. At the temple, of the oracle at Delphi, there was that saying written on the top, know thyself, right? and that is know who you are. So that notion of understand who you are is central to ancient wisdom, not just Indian. So let me ask you then, who are these two birds and what is this tree? So this is a verse that comes up in the Mundaka Upanishad. There are two birds, two dear friends that live in the very same tree. The one eats the fruit in anxious greed while the other watches silently. Yes, Srinivas, but from a corporate setting, absolutely. How do you, from an individual level, yes, but what is it from a leadership perspective? What is the leadership aspect of it? Because this is a class on leadership. So how would you frame this from a leadership perspective? Taking versus giving, at some level, yes, but there's a more fundamental difference than taking versus giving. By the way, taking versus giving is a good division. Adam Grant writes about it in his book, Give and Take. Some are givers, some are takers, and some are givers and takers. But from an even deeper, okay, listeners, coexistence, execution, and marketing. It's me leading with self-interest, absolutely, and you're just leading with group interest. So clearly you're getting there, absolutely. So yes, so doer and driver, yes, doer and driver, manager and reportee, performer and non-performer, very interesting. Okay, so really the way to think about it when it comes to leadership is the lower bird is the one that is all about doing and having and meeting deadlines and getting work done. The great anxiety, like the anxious greed and anxiety about fruit is very much to do with, yes, the great anxiety of meeting commitments, doing what's expected of you. Ever think about the doing part of working in companies? That's a big source clearly of stress and also of joy. So you go up and down with that. And it's a great source of anxiety. So that's the doing part of it. Whether you call it execution, whatever terms you may use, it's the doing aspect of you. And that's a very important aspect of leadership, the ability to execute, the ability to do. But the higher bird, the other bird, the one that watches silently, is in ancient wisdom, it was the being. It's being, some of you mentioned Paramatma. There are many terms used for it in different religions. If you're an atheist and are a believer in science, it could be called pure reason. Reason itself is the higher bird. You don't have to be a religious person. You don't even have to be spiritual to have this dichotomy in you, the doing and the being part of it. Many atheists have been philosophers of being. So really, it's the more calm witness part of you, the one that takes the big picture, the one that has a much longer term perspective, the one that is an observer, the one that doesn't react right away, the one that waits and waits to make judgment, to pass judgment, and the one that is filled with empathy and compassion. So it's, yes, you could argue it's the intellect, and beyond just the mind is the intellect. In ancient Indian wisdom, it was called buddhi. There's a wonderful book written on it by one of the leaders in this field of organizational behavior called Richard Daft. And yes, he calls the higher bird the intellect. It's a wonderful book. It's a good book to read. And yes, there's another researcher called Jonathan Haidt who wrote this book, The Happiness Hypothesis. And he called it the elephant and the elephant rider. The elephant is the one that's filled with anxiety, emotions, and feelings. The rider is the intellect part of it, the one that is more calm and observant. So there are different analogies and metaphors. I like this one because it's a softer, gentler one and makes the difference between doing and being. For those of you interested in the Sanskrit part of it, it is Dvav Suparnao Saija Sakhayam Samanam Vriksham Parishasvajate Tayoranyah Pipalam Swadhyatya Anashnamanyor Abhichakashiti. Dvav Suparnao are two birds, and they cling to the very same branch. And Abhichakashiti means watches silently, watches compassionately. So this is a theme that I will take up throughout the next hour and a half sessions. This is all about cultivating, of course, the doer, which we will cultivate, but cultivating the witness in you, the being aspect of you, as a way to deal with stress, as a way to increase your psychological well-being, as a way to be more effective as a leader. And I'll describe why that is important. That's what I call as being for leadership. Being for leadership is being anchored in that being, the higher bird, but fully expressing yourself in the world of doing. The two are completely interconnected and enabling that harmony or balance, both internally and with the outside world. So really the key theme about leadership and being for leadership in particular is the balance between the doer and the being aspect, the doing and the being. You can't destroy one, you can't get rid of one, and you can't put one on a pedestal. So you need both, the right balance between the two. If you destroy the lower bird, then you become a mystic who cannot function in companies. If you destroy the higher bird, then you just become Gordon Gekko, all about greed and all about the lower bird. That too is harmful for companies and for the ecosystem in which companies perform. So the right balance between them will be the theme here, between doing and being. So this is a very ancient metaphor, perhaps the oldest metaphor in the world, in world history, on this balance between doing and being. And so this is something that I will pick up here. And that directly links to, and Condell, I'm going to pass on that. I encourage you to go to my website, beingfulness.com, where the difference between beingfulness and mindfulness is described in great detail. But I'll just mention that at a high level, the main difference is to do with the very notion of being itself. That very notion of the witness, the being is not there in mindfulness. Being is also all across time, not just in the moment. Mindfulness is about the particular moment. And beingfulness is also a lot about purpose, having a long-term purpose. So these are some of the highest level differences. The notion of being, the notion of spanning time, not just in the moment. And I'll introduce later the whole notion of meaning is very critical to beingfulness, less so to mindfulness. And finally, the great importance of purpose. So with that, let me continue with purpose. Yes, if you can drop the domain name here. And Anita, if I could request you, let me just go ahead and type it in. There's a lot of information there about, there we go, beingfulness.com. There's a lot of information on beingful work, beingful leadership, as much philosophy as you can handle, perhaps a lot more than you would care to look at, and a lot of psychology, a lot of stuff there. There are hundreds of pages right there. And so those of you interested in looking at the background to all this work, please look up that website. So yes, I want to begin with the importance of purpose. This is both good for you personally and good for you professionally. And I want to distinguish between purpose and higher purpose. Purpose is something you do for yourself. That's the lower bird purpose. Higher purpose is something that includes others, the higher bird purpose, something you do for yourself that goes beyond yourself. Why is this important? There's a lot of research that suggests that this kind of purpose, actually having any purpose at all, but especially having a higher purpose, is actually good for not just your well-being in terms of psychological well-being, but also in terms of your physical health. So there's research conducted across more than 7,000 participants in the 1990s in the US, the midlife US survey, and they were then tracked 14 years later. And it turned out that the ones who had this sense of purpose, particularly the larger purpose, were more likely to live. Their likelihood of dying reduced by 15%, 1/6. And that is very significant. Why do you think that would be? Let me just quickly ask you, why does having a sense of purpose, especially a purpose that includes others, what's also called pro-social purpose, why do you think that makes a difference to your physical health? We know it makes a difference to our motivation, desire to get up in the morning, all that, our psychological side. It gives us something to look forward to, gives us all that. But why yes, absolutely, it gives us all that, mental well-being, something to live for, mind and body tied together. And Anthony, you're right there, mind and body tied together, feeling of accomplishment. Absolutely. And Arun, you hit that, absolutely. So it is to do with the fact that our psychological well-being, which is increased by purpose, also affects our physical well-being. In particular, it strengthens our immune system in terms of the hormones that strengthen our immune system. So there's a clear link to our immune system itself. It fortifies our immune system. So for a variety of reasons, not just having to do with satisfaction and joy and meaning and all that, it actually affects also our physical well-being. That's something to take into account. Essentially our whole being. It affects all of us and everything in us. So that's why I emphasize this whole notion of having a higher purpose. And that's for you, the individual. It also helps the company have a higher purpose. And I'll later show you some data that says why that is so. So given that it's important to have some sense of purpose, and again, I don't mean you have to have a purpose that says, I will rescue, save the world. You don't need that kind of a purpose. That's too grand a purpose. You don't need a grand purpose because you might be disappointed. You could have a simple purpose. You could have a purpose that just says, I will take the next one day with calmness, low anxiety, equanimity. I will live moment to moment. That too is a good purpose. Essentially, intention, living your life with some intention. That is a big way to essentially balance between the lower bird and higher bird. So you're drawing on the higher bird in order to enable some equanimity for the lower bird. So yes, an achievable purpose definitely helps, or a stretch purpose. So in the process of developing this purpose and then living your life according to it, again, as I want to emphasize again, doesn't have to be a grand purpose. This is the journey that I've found helpful in my life and in the lives of many of the leaders that I observed, who I would call as beingful leaders. There are many of them. Azim Premji in India would be one of them. Narayan Murthy, of course, also would say is one of them. You could say in the US, there are a number of them. Paul Pullman, CEO of Unilever, the former CEO of Unilever, is definitely one of them. Jochen Zeitz, who was the former CEO of Puma and transformed Puma in the 1990s and has done a lot of work in this area. I would say he's another beingful leader. Ray Anderson, CEO of Interface, an amazing company that led the way for sustainability. Another great example of beingful leadership. Paul Hawken, transforming, person who transformed the field of sustainability. Another beingful leader. Many of them. I would also go back to Anita Roddick, one of the original beingful leaders, Health Shop founder who passed away unfortunately some years ago. Yes, these are all beingful leaders. And the journey that I have observed is this. One, develop an understanding of yourself. First task, develop a better understanding of yourself. That all dictum, understand who you are. And that's the recognition stage. In this recognition phase or stage, you develop a better understanding of yourself and what your purpose is. And that is called self-awareness. That leadership capability is called self-awareness. Research suggests that it's the foundational leadership capability. There's been dissertations written on it, lots of work done on it, that suggests that the number one foundational leadership capability or competency is self-awareness. You can be effective if you are self-aware. You're much less effective if you're not self-aware. And self-awareness, in turn, is associated with other capabilities like self-confidence, motivation, and so on. It pulls them along. But self-awareness is not enough. It's only a foundation. You also need to be aware of others. You need to be able to understand others. And that comes from experience. Experience in which you've had to spend time with others, perhaps difficult experiences. They become the crucibles of this kind of awareness, where perhaps you failed and learned from that. And yes, they build on one another, Kunal. They build on one another, but then it is an iterative process. You're never complete with self-awareness. You're never fully done. Yes, Suresh, that's an interesting comment. I'm not going to comment on it. But yes, they build on one another and they also iterate back. So experience is all about empathy, developing a sense of purpose that includes others. That's where empathy comes in, and understanding of others. Empathy also often gets associated with humility. This is what was observed in the 1990s when a lot of research was done on some of the great leaders of companies, written in Good to Great and so on. Humility, but tremendous determination was a hallmark of these great leaders. This kind of humility coupled with the third capability, persistence or self-regulation. And that's the anchoring phase. In my experience, that's been the most difficult for me, where you develop that daily commitment, a daily commitment to aggressive leaders could be self-aware, Sapna, but also have a lot of drive and so on. So aggressive leaders don't necessarily have to be low in self-awareness, but the number of aggressive leaders, bullies, for example, are not particularly self-aware. Psychopaths are not self-aware. Sociopaths are not self-aware. That's a key difference between them and others. And I'm just responding quickly to some of the comments that I can respond to over here. Anchoring is a very important phase, perhaps the most difficult and the greatest opportunity here in COVID times for us to develop those daily habits, the daily commitment, and that's self-regulation. Self-regulation is connected to persistence and courage, but all these three capabilities are somewhat internal. Our self-awareness, our empathy, our self-regulation may not be very observable by others. Ideally, it would be, but often it's not. What really is observable by others is your leadership by example. And that is where all these come together for the most important of all beingful leadership capabilities, that's integrity. It's the heart. Integrity is what enables the balance between the lower bird and the higher bird. Integrity is what enables internal and external harmony. And you become a leader who inspires others by your example. So I'll quickly go through these. These are what I call as being capital. These are reserves inside us and between us that enable this kind of leadership capability, which I call being full. I call them being capital. And how do you go about developing them? So let's look at the life of Satya Nadella. In his own words, Satya Nadella, I would say, is currently a great example of a being full leader, and the way he has run Microsoft, the way he's led his life. And I highly encourage all of you to read his book, Hit Refresh. Really chronicling his life and his times at Microsoft. He's about 54 years old now, became CEO in 2014, and his 3 children are important to his life. His eldest is Zain, a boy, and 2 girls, Divya and Tara. And his background, he's a Hyderabad guy, by the way, another reason why I'm fond of him. Here at ISB Hyderabad, he's Microsoft is right next to us. And so, yes, he's a local boy who's done well. And why does it matter? Why does self-awareness matter? And again, I want to emphasize the line between personal and professional is increasingly blurring. And here is an example of how and why.
Your first child was born with cerebral palsy. He is now 21 years old. So how did you realize that was going to change your life, and how have you dealt with that issue?
Yeah, even I was 29 years old when Zain, our son, was born, and if you had even asked me maybe even an hour before he was born what was going through my head, it was all about, is the nursery going to be ready? What's going to happen to our weekends now we have a son? And when will Anu, my wife, get back to a job, and so on. But obviously everything changed that night. He was born because of an undetected in utero distress, asphyxiation, with severe brain damage, and that led to cerebral palsy, and he's quadriplegic now. The first, I would say, David, maybe even 2 years or more even, I was more about, why did this happen to me? What happened to us? And all of these plans that I had are now all been thrown up in the air and changed. Whereas Anu, my wife, what came naturally to her as a mother was, she said, okay, I'm not going back to my job. I'm going to really care for my son, drive him around for therapy after therapy. And I watched that. Without schooling me, I got schooled. That nothing happened to me. What happened was to my son, and that it was time for me to understand that, realize that, see life through his eyes, and then do my duty as a father. That, to me, perhaps, it didn't come in one moment. It's something that I think took time. But as I figured it out, it changed me, both as obviously a parent, but also who I am today and how I approach everything.
Now, your wife was trained as an architect.
That's right.
And she's given up doing that for a while.
That's right.
Now, you have 2 daughters. One of your daughters has severe learning disabilities as well. And how did that affect you and your wife?
In fact, one of the things that happened because of our son was we built up a tremendous community of people, whether this was the therapists or other parents with, of children with disabilities. And so we were involved in that community. By the time our youngest daughter came into our lives, I must say we had the richness of this community to support us. And it turned, when we recognized very early on, and Anu and I, and Anu in particular, was very quick to realize that she will need additional help. And so we found this school actually in Vancouver, BC, which was all around neuroplasticity. The idea was you can train your brain to learn, so instead of compensating. And so we decided that, we're going to move the family to Vancouver. Zain was going to stay with me in Seattle. My daughters and my wife were going to live in Vancouver. We were going to commute again over the weekends. But the thing that all, quite honestly, that is where it came all.
Okay, so I'm not going to go further on that. I hope the volume is good enough. The book is hit refresh, and the blue line's been erased. And Anupam, I will not discuss Ikigai in this class. I don't have enough time, unfortunately. I have a number of other things, but that is one of the things I do talk about in the more detailed personal leadership class. So notice here, his self-awareness increased. Earlier, it was about him, right? It was me. Why did this happen to me? That kind of victim mentality. But very quickly, he realized it's really not about me. There's someone else who needs all the help. And that's sort of going back to the witness place. You're moving from the reactor, the one who's reacting like the lower bird, to the witness and seeing that really it's someone else who's taking the big picture in account, someone else who's been influenced. And that's a very important capability. And that is what self-awareness is. Recognizing that it's not just about you, that there is a bigger picture over here. Understanding your values, your desires, and especially how it affects others. Understanding how your behaviors, your thought patterns, your values and your desires. If I could request, please turn off the microphone, mute yourself. Commander Usman. Let me call out Commander Usman. Please mute yourself. And thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what self-awareness is. It's not just about you and your understanding, but understanding how you impact others, how your attitudes, your feelings, your values impact others. That's very critical. So what research suggests is that's more important than your own awareness of yourself. To understand how others perceive you is very important. And now let's look at the next. And there was a question asked here, are these sequential? They are spiral. And in a spiral approach, they're sequential, but then they iterate back. I don't know how many of you have seen the spiral model where it spirals around. By the way, one of the things about spiral is how to describe it without actually using your hand to describe it. So these are not sequential in a strict sense, they're spiral. And you keep relearning them, you keep revisiting the earlier capabilities as you get better and better. So now let's understand empathy. So until now, it was about Satya Nadella's self-awareness, but where does empathy come in? And is it just something that's for our personal life? Or is it just something for our friends and family?
Your son lives with you now.
Yes.
And one of the qualities that you say you got from all this was empathy, and that the result of having empathy made you a better CEO and a better person. Is that fair?
Yeah, in fact, when I look at empathy, and most people think empathy is just something that you reserve, for your life and your family and your friends or what have you. But the reality is, I think it's an existential priority for a business. Because if you look at it, like, what is our business? Our business is to meet unmet, unarticulated needs of customers. There is no way our innovation to meet unmet, unarticulated needs is going to come about if we don't listen. Not just listen to the words, but go deep to understand what the needs are behind it. So I think empathy is core to innovation. And life's experience, if you listen and you learn from, teaches you. I wouldn't claim, as I've sort of even talked about it, with any innate capability of empathy that I was born with. If anything, it's life that has taught me. And if anything, my pursuit is every year, is there growing sense of empathy for people around me?
Okay, so that is what empathy is. And I'm actually, give me a second, please. If I can request people not to draw on the slides, and if I can request AV to actually disable annotation. Anita? So what happens is when I disable it myself, I lose my. Okay, clearly someone is drawing on these slides. Niru, let me call out Niru, please. Niru, let me request you not to draw on the slides. Would that be fine with you? Unfortunately, it's created a problem for me here. Okay, so yes, so we are having some annotations here. And Anita, please request Niru not to do so. Who Niru is. I'm just going to actually stop the share for a while. That's created problems. And let me actually take questions while I am trying to figure this out. My screen is frozen over here. And so let me just take questions. And I also appreciate the comment from Kushal, right? So let's not, absolutely, I'll not be discussing political aspects here at all. Clearly, political leadership is an important one, but that's outside the scope of this particular session. We'll not be talking about politics. Okay. Let me just look at questions. And please go ahead, use your microphone if you want to. There's a question. My problem is I've frozen my screen here while I was trying to undo the notations. Please go ahead. I might give you a 5-minute break to actually fix this. But in the meanwhile, I'm happy to take a question. While I try to fix this, if I cannot, I'll give you a 5-minute break. And I'll personally call Niru to, to ask. Go ahead, please. Go ahead and go ahead if you have a question. Yes.
For a successful CIO,
Yes.
which attribute of leadership you give most important? You have discussed 5-6 attributes.
Yes, yes. In my experience and from all that I've seen and read, integrity. Integrity is the sum total of all of those.
Okay.
Integrity is what allows you to display everything.
Okay.
So yeah, integrity is what others see and perceive. And yes, I would say integrity is number one. By the way, it's also been called the cardinal virtue. In ancient wisdom also, it was considered number one, integrity. Other questions, please. Sweta, go ahead.
Professor, this is Ravi Gupta. I just like to understand if, you are pointing out a non-performer and maybe asking him to leave an organization, would that, mean that you are unempathetic to that person?
Oh, no. So it all depends on how you do it. And those of you who've had the opportunity or the challenge of firing employees, it's not an easy one, especially your first few firings. But after you've let go hundreds of people, you recognize that, yes, there are ways to do it. I think it's doing it with respect. I've had, for example, when I was the chief operating officer of a company, I had to let go one of those people, a senior partner. And it was not easy, it was difficult, but it was clear to me that he was better off in another organization. And so if you do it with respect, if you do it with concern for that individual, and I also want to emphasize, empathy does not mean softness. You can be very tough and empathetic. You could be firm and empathetic. That's a common misconception that empathy means softness and weakness. Not at all. And the difference between empathy and sympathy is that empathy, you understand how others feel, but sympathy, you don't have to feel the way they feel. And that's where you can separate yourself from their feelings and emotions. So yes, if you do it with respect, then absolutely, it is very doable. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Other questions? And I'm going to give you, I'll take one more question, then give you a 5-minute break while I figure this out. And we're going to turn off the notations. Go ahead, please.
Professor Ram, good evening. It is said when you are doing it empathetically, it means you are putting yourself into the other person's shoe and then taking a harder decision. So these are things which are contradict to each other. That is what I feel.
Right. So let's take that up. In fact, contradiction is, we also need to recognize that, let me call these, I don't want to use the word contradiction in terms of exact opposite. These are different things that we can reconcile. So let's take up the point you raised, right? Understanding someone else's point of view is actually very important. And that's what empathy is, understanding another person's point of view. Again, as I emphasize, you're not feeling the other person's feelings. That's sympathy. But understanding someone else's point of view doesn't mean you agree with it. You can understand why they came to that particular decision or that behavior, but you don't have to agree with it. But at least you have the ability to understand it. And you may know that famous line that a sign of fine intelligence is to hold two opposite points of view in your mind and be comfortable doing so without having to go one way or the other. That's a very important leadership capability, to hold multiple points of view in your mind. And then you can decide. Then you can take different considerations. But it is not a contradiction in that sense. It becomes a synthesis. You synthesize these different points of view. You don't, again, have to agree with them. Other questions?
Thank you.
Professor Ram.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, Professor.
Good evening, sir. So a quick question.
Yeah.
Can you actually guide so as to how do we increase on our regulation? And you yourself have faced this challenge, self-regulation.
Yes. You ask a question I've broken my head against a wall for many years, and I think finally I have a sort of an answer that is working for me. Right? It's one of the hardest, and so my answer is I use something called the daily meds, MEDSS. The first one is meditation. So the answer to self-regulation lies outside of work. So for me, I practice daily meditation of about half an hour, and that's the end part of it. If you don't believe in meditation, you could do reflection. If you don't believe in reflection, you could do silence, something to calm your mind. I believe meditation is wonderful, but there are many other ways to do it. The next one is exercise, daily exercise. That daily exercise is also very helpful, not just physically, but also to your whole being, psychologically, and so on. The third one is diet, watching your diet. That is a very important aspect of our health and well-being. Research suggests it accounts for 50% of our well-being. Increasingly, diet has become a big focus of research in psychology and, of course, in the medical profession. So that's M is meditation, E is exercise, D is diet, S is sleep. Many of us have a hard time sleeping or don't get enough sleep or are so stressed out or work so much, we don't get much sleep. But recent research suggests that sleep is absolutely fundamental to all aspects of our health and well-being. Until 10 years ago, it was not very clear why we slept and why other species also sleep. But now the research has come together very well in the last 10 years. There's an excellent book that I would recommend called Why We Sleep that summarizes this research. That research shows that it affects every aspect of what we do and what we think and who we are. So it has become, and not just us, all creatures sleep. And so that's why sleep is the fourth one that I think is very important. There are a lot of techniques for good sleep. Meditation helps you sleep. But this book, Why We Sleep, gives you a lot of examples of how to sleep if you have problems in sleep. The final S of MEDSS is something special. Do something special that addresses the needs of your higher bird. I don't mean watch endless runs of Netflix, which is really the needs of the lower bird. But do something that soothes or informs your higher bird. That could be gardening, reading, many other things, music, hobbies that you've had. Let me ask you at this stage, how many of you have used these times, COVID times, to rediscover an old hobby or a pastime that gave you a lot of deep joy, and now you've had the opportunity to try it out? And please say which one it is. What was it that that helped you rediscover? Absolutely. Terrace garden. It's amazing how many people I know have rediscovered this or discovered it anew. Feeding street dogs. Absolutely. Doing something that matters to you. Cooking. Playing violin. Yes. So this is the final S I'm referring to. Sailing, singing. Notice these are all higher bird kinds of hobbies. They give you that kind of grounding. So yes, that's my answer that I've discovered in the past 5 years. I've finally been able to make progress on it, the daily meds. If you do it, then it gives you a lot of, does that help you?
So do you really think it will help in increasing my persistence and consistency also in my performance?
Yeah, so yes, it does. Actually, the daily meds, the self-regulation affects actually everything. Self-regulation increases your persistence, it increases your focus, your productivity, it increases your creativity, because you are a more balanced person, more regulated person. So it is sort of a core one. It has a very similar capability as integrity. Self-regulation is internal integrity, internal to yourself. And the integrity I was talking about is external integrity. So it affects everything. So if you can do it, it will transform your life. In all the leadership courses I've taught, people have come back a year, 2 years later and say that the single most important thing that they picked up was daily meds. If you can practice this, you can forget everything else in this course. If you just do the daily meds, it will affect all those leadership competencies. And let me just take one more question, then I'm going to give you a 10-minute break.
Hello,
Thank you,
Prof.
Prof.
Ram Anupam here.
Anupam, go ahead, please.
Sir,
The reason why I had talked
Go ahead,
about
Anupam.
the reason why
Yeah,
I had
sir.
talked about Ikigai was
Let me just do Anupam, and then is that Shweta who had a hand up? I can't see her. Let me just Anupam, and then the lady who's speaking. Anupam, just quickly. So I know you asked for Ikigai.
yeah.
Yes.
The reason I asked was because I had attended your course, Leadership in the Era of Crisis, last October.
Okay, Anupam.
And I still remember that the way you explained it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that.
Today again, and if you don't remember me, I'll just give you a hint. We had discussed Howard Roke. Remember?
Okay. Yes. I'm the fountainhead. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Anupam, the reason I would just want to mention that since that time of Ikigai, I've actually developed a tool of my own. I
Okay.
call it Purpose at Work. And that takes some time to do. That's why I'm not showing it here. That's
Okay,
Karma
fine.
Dharma. Karma
Good to see
Dharma.
you, sir. Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely, Anupam. Thank you very much. And
Thank
there's
you.
a lady who's just speaking. Please go ahead. There's someone who was, can't see who it was, but there's someone who was just about to say something.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, please.
So as Miss Pia asked a question, and you very well replied on with this technique. So I think it is related to self-control as well, because I found it quite related with the things what I was expecting.
Yes. Self-regulation, self-control are the same terms. Self-discipline, self-regulation, self-control. Many people don't like the word control. So a lot of people, researchers use the word regulation instead of control, because a lot of people don't like the word control. It has a negative reaction. So that's why self-regulation is used instead of self-control, but they mean the same thing. So with that, I know there was a question from Jaiswal. Jaiswal, did you have a question? Okay, in the absence of that, let me give you a 10-minute break while we figure out the scribbling thing and shut it off. So our goal is to shut it off. And let me request again, when we come back, please do not mark on this. So let me give you a 10-minute break. Please take a bio break for 10 minutes, and we'll come back and then spend about an hour or so, hour and 15 minutes. So let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back. Thank you very much. But again, please don't do so if for some reason we have not done it successfully. So someone asked me about self-regulation, and that's exactly what the daily meds is about. If there is one thing you take away from this particular masterclass, I would suggest it's this one. It changes everything. It helps you become more self-aware, it helps you become more empathetic, and it also leads to greater integrity. It takes time, it's not easy, and it helps to do all 5 of them. Then comes integrity. And I've talked about it as the primary virtue, the primary competency. And the thing about integrity is it has 2 ways of viewing it. One is the honesty part of it. The other one is also hanging together well, balance, harmony, a state of being whole. That is also very important. And there's been a lot of research on integrity, in particular by Professor Michael Jensen, who is the godfather of stock options. He's the finance guru who led to all the work and employee stock options, ESOPs. And in his later years, he did research on integrity, and it shows that the ability to keep or honor your word actually leads to 100 to 500% increase in your performance. So if there is one capability that you would say immediately shows gains, tangible performance gains, is this one. And I don't mean just in terms of honesty, it's the basic ability to keep or honor your word. If you cannot keep your word, at least honor it by cleaning up the mess. That distinction is very important. They're both signs of integrity. Cleaning up the mess from not keeping your word. For example, if you said, I'll get something done on a particular day, and many people on that day tell their clients, sorry, it didn't get done. But there's a big mess that is created from that. On the other hand, if you anticipate it will not get done, and you sort of honestly tell people it will not get done, and here's how I'll clean up the mess from it. The cleaning up the mess is a very important part of honoring your word. And it's not just good for relations, it's actually good for your own performance. So there is a self-interest right here, because you become reliable, you become trustworthy, and you become more professional in your work. So that's what integrity is. And it turns out that these capabilities are also good for the company. Companies that follow these kinds of human virtues or these kinds of values have been shown in this book, Forms of Endearment, to actually outperform other companies. There's some great work by Raj Sisodia, Jack Shade, the guru of marketing, and Dan Wolfe. So the 3 of them wrote this book on these kinds of capabilities. And it turns out in the first 3 years, firms of endearment, as they're called, US firms or international firms, may not be better than other kinds of firms like the S&P 500 or the good to great companies, which were written about in the 1990s. Jim Collins in particular talked of the good to great firms. But in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, they begin to outperform. In 5 years, they're twice, 2.5 times as good as the S&P 500. In 10 years, there are 4 to 5 times as good as the S&P 500 in terms of stock performance, financial performance. 15 years, they tend to be about 15 times, 10 to 15 times as good. So this is good for the company itself because it leads to relationships with stakeholders, employees, customers that are much more reliable, much more trust-based, and therefore much more efficient and effective. So with that, I want to switch sections. Any question on this first part, section 2? Section 1 was foundations. Section 2 was leadership capabilities. Section 3 will be the notion of being full work, which I'll try to wrap up in about 20 minutes. Any questions from this, either on chat or in person? Please go ahead and use the microphone. Any questions on what we just finished on leadership capabilities? And I'm just looking here, Sanjeev, yes, coexistence is a very important part. That's part of that balance or harmony or integrity. I think that's an existential challenge for us. That's very critical. Givers versus takers. I see a lot of other comments over here. And yes, thank you very much. I have a question. Pranav, go ahead, please.
Sir, yes, this is Pranav Goenka from Hyderabad.
Go ahead.
You were talking about integrity.
Yes.
So in an organization, there are so many tools you can use to measure performance.
Yes.
But can you suggest any tools that you can use to measure trust or integrity?
Yes. So these are more behavioral tools. So these are tools as perceived by other people. And actually, I don't know if you filled out the questionnaire that I sent you a few days ago. There is not a measure of integrity, but a measure of authenticity, which is related to our integrity. So what you typically do is, this is qualitative. And so you get other people to evaluate if this person behaved with integrity in terms of meeting commitments, for example, or cleaning up if there was a mess. And you can use what are called Likert scales. You can ask person, to what extent does this person do such and such? Not at all, great extent. It could be a scale from 1 to 7. And it turns out that the average of a number of items like this is like a quantitative number, becomes like a ratio scale. And you can actually use statistical analysis for those kinds of numbers. And just as a background, there's a whole bunch of theory called the central limit theorem, which says that kind of data, when averaged across, and if you have large enough sample size, is like a normal distribution. So you can analyze it like regular data. That's how you convert qualitative data into quantitative data. Does that make sense? So use qualitative questions. Use qualitative questions. Ask other people to evaluate this person. My survey that I gave you is actually a lot of qualitative questions from which you can do a lot of quantitative analysis. And I hope that also answered the question one of you had, Bhadresh. Bhadresh had on explain more integrity. So the normal description of integrity is honesty, truthfulness. But this is another aspect of integrity that is important, and that is meeting your commitments, either meeting or honoring your commitments. Some people would argue, and the reason why Michael Jensen took this approach is that, honesty, truthfulness, and so on get into philosophical, existential questions. Whereas something like this, did you meet or honor your commitments, is a more objective kind of an issue. And so we saw Venkat, yes, autocratic, democratic, free, and actually there are many of them. I mean, there's a whole journal devoted to this called Leadership Quarterly. It describes all kinds of leadership approaches, and they fall by and large into that kind of a category. Autocratic, democratic has many different variations. The Upanishads are also, yes, that's the area, Venkat, that's exactly the area I'm doing research on. How to integrate the Upanishads with modern research on leadership and psychology. Integrity is a character. Should be practiced for a lifetime. Absolutely, Yashas. It is a character virtue. Absolutely. It is a sign of character, integrity, and a number of others. Kindness, for example, that's also another. This is called what is called eretiological or virtue ethics. This is what the ancient Greeks and the ancient Indians really valued. Character traits. Yes, it's the dominant character trait. Okay, so let me move on to section 3. Section 3 is how do you now implement this in practice, right? And that's what I mean by being full work. So here I want to emphasize the big difference between happiness and meaning, and happiness and meaning. We all pursue happiness. Often it is a big mistake to do so. The direct pursuit of happiness actually leads to unhappiness. A lot of research suggests that. My own experience, I spent many years pursuing happiness and I was very unhappy. Then I spent a lot of time pursuing meaning, and I find myself much happier than before. So meaning is a gateway to happiness. What's the difference? Happiness is your emotional state, your feelings and your emotions, and you're trying to keep them pleasant. That in itself is a problem. Always trying to have pleasant emotions is a problem. One, it is hard to sustain. Two, it may not be good for you. Often the unpleasant emotions, the difficulties, the suffering, the sorrow may actually be good for you in the long run. Whereas meaning is a cognitive thing. It's you look at your life, you look at what happened in your life, and you come to an evaluation, a judgment. And that is where you make sense out of what you do. That sense, or what the significance you gave to your life or to an event is much more long lasting. It's much more stable. It's much more deeply, in that sense, significant to you. It also turns out that there are some real behavioral differences between people who pursue happiness and people who pursue meaning that really matters for you as a leader and for your organization. If you emphasize happiness, then the person, the employee, or you yourself will be a lot more focused on the present. That person will be a lot more about taking. So if you have a member of your team and you stress that team member's happiness, that team member will be a lot about taking and not giving to the team. That team member will not care much about identity, nor the identity of the team. Whereas if you emphasize meaning, then meaning is a lot more focused on the past, present, and future. You create a narrative or a story or something that spans time. You also become more of a giving person. You're more oriented to giving. You're more oriented to others. So if you're a team member, then you care for the team as a whole. You become pro-social, as it's called. And you also care a lot about your identity and the identity of the team or the organization. These are very big differences. Some great research in this area and something I've experienced myself. So my own personal experiences really try and pursue meaning. And that applies then to how do we approach our work? Do we approach it as a job? Do we approach it as a career? Do we approach it as a duty, a passion, or a calling? And we may approach it as a combination of these things. But it turns out that if you approach your work as just a job, and your employees also just approach it as a job, then they don't find much meaning in it. Meaning increases as you go down this list. So in that sense, if you're looking to find meaning in your work, and if you want your employees to find meaning and therefore be motivated in your work, in their work, then try to move them from wherever they are to something deeper down in the list. If they see it as a duty, see if you can ignite passion in them. If they see it as a passion, see if it's possible to make it a calling. And especially for you, see if your own work can become more of your calling. Because you spend half your life, half your time, and more than half your life in work. And so in that sense, to make it something that's purposeful, it is something that expresses your purpose, provides you the greatest meaning. So this is something to look at. How do you look at your job? Let me just quickly ask you, how do you look at your job? Of course, there are mixes of them, but what is the dominant mix? Do you look at it primarily as a job, primarily as a career, primarily as a duty? Go ahead, please. Okay. Career, passion. I see a lot of, to be honest, absolutely, to be honest. And if I can request, Paras, if I could mute your microphone, please. Please go ahead and mute your microphone. Okay. Very interesting. Okay. So let me just ask Hemant, you said calling, and why calling? Was it, no, actually not Hemant, Anmol. Anmol, you said calling. Why calling? Calling is a very specific meaning. It's almost as if this work is specifically for you. You feel called to do it. Is that something you're feeling, that you're called to do it, internally or externally? Go ahead, Anmol, go ahead, please. Please unmute yourself. And you had listed that you see your work as calling. Could you just spend a minute just explaining why so? Go ahead, Anmol. Okay, I think there may be a problem here. Okay, so calling is a particular kind of approach which requires a lot from you. Sometimes you pay a big price for it. But if you're looking for something deeply meaningful, that's probably where you'd want to end up in. There's a wonderful book on that called Make Your Job Your Calling. It's an excellent book by some top researchers in the field on how you can get a lot more meaning out of your life. It's called Make Your Job Your Calling. and it's by D.I.K., and the last name is unpronounceable. But just look it up. That's a great book on how to get more out of your work. Another way to look at your work is how can I get more meaning from it in the following ways. And this has been shown to really increase meaning in your work. Does it have enough variety? Do you have more autonomy? These are the biggest drivers of meaning. Do you bring your deep beliefs to your work? That's why many people who join NGOs and have a lot of beliefs find a lot of meaning. They may not get paid well. They may be unhappy also. Keep in mind, unhappiness and meaning could go hand in hand. But they definitely get a lot of meaning if you bring your deep beliefs. And positive psychology has shown that perhaps the best way to find your work to be meaningful is to play to your strengths. Don't worry so much about your weaknesses, play to your strengths. So that's been a very important lesson. And as I've mentioned before, focusing on the greater good, going beyond yourself. And finally, linking your efforts to outcomes that really matter to you. So you found Shahrer, yes, that is a big challenge with calling. It can lead you down the wrong path. Absolutely. So you may have to try it again, all over again. Yes, calling is not an easy path. So here are some ways you can find your work, make your work more meaningful. And so now I'm going to show you some data, and then I'll answer a lot of questions. So I'm now getting to the concept of level 2, which is being full work. Being full work is about how you and the people who report to you or your colleagues can essentially create work that meets your full needs. By full needs, I mean your whole self, everything that you are. To aspire to meet the needs of the whole self. This is what I mean by being full work. Work that strives to fulfill the needs of the whole self. And so that leads to the question, what is the whole self? Here are some 4 kinds of self that are within you. So they're an extension of the 2 birds. You could argue that the bird we were talking about, the lower bird, was really the material self and the psychological self. The higher self is the higher bird. And the self that connects the 2 of them, that connects the lower bird and the higher bird, is the relational self. So in that sense, it's an extension of what we learned earlier. But here's what the material self is. It's your physical health at work. It's the workload that you have, the time you spend in commute, all the energy that goes into it. So to what extent are your physical needs being met at work? To what extent are your monetary needs being fulfilled? Let me use the word fulfilled and not meet. To what extent are your monetary needs being fulfilled? The salary that you want, the perks, and the growth in income. So ask yourself and ask the people who report to you, to what extent are each of these needs being fulfilled? To what extent is your energy, your workload and your commute? I'm sorry, that comes up twice. It really should just be here in the energy part. It should not be in the physical, it's right in the energy part. So forget the workload, commute, and the physical. Physical is just about physical health and safety, whereas energy is about your workload and your commute. Ask yourself and ask people who report to you, to what extent is the work fulfilling the needs of their ambition, the title they want, the career path, the professional recognition. And that's the material self. Then the psychological self is all about developing your personality. To what extent does the work enable you or fulfill your needs to develop your personality? And very importantly, intellectual stimulation. This comes up repeatedly. To what extent is your work stimulating you intellectually, giving you chances to learn, acquire a growth mindset, giving you variety? Because that kind of stimulation leads directly to meaning. To what extent is your work fulfilling the needs of your emotional feelings and affective self? That's called affective. It's to do with emotions and feelings. And very importantly, to what extent is your work fulfilling your need for autonomy, freedom and autonomy? So that's the psychological self. But equally important is relational self. To what extent is your work allowing you to fulfill your needs to work with your colleagues, collaboration? We are social creatures after all. So we have a need to collaborate. We have a need to work with others. Often we may jeopardize it. We may create problems. But Akash, I'm going to come to that. It's actually strictly not Maslow's hierarchy. In fact, the next slide talks about it. It's actually an extension of it. But yes, relational self is all about your relationships with your colleagues, your need to serve your customers, need to have a positive impact on society, which, by the way, the Maslow needs hierarchy doesn't consider at all. doesn't consider these aspects, and the environmental, very importantly, the environmental, which again, the needs hierarchy doesn't consider. And finally, the higher self. To what extent does your work fulfill your needs to do the right thing, to do work ethically? We all have deep within us a desire to do the right thing. We may not do it for a variety of reasons. The environment in a way corrupts us, but deep down there is a desire and a need to do the right thing. But our environment, the people around us, the rules around us, our companies, the political situation, all these at some level corrupt us. But yet there is a deep need we all have to do the right thing. Working with integrity, as I mentioned, is an important one. Finally, for those of you spiritual, you may have a higher purpose, ikigai, as one of you mentioned, dharma, reason for being, pursuing a dharma. These are all deep needs that we have. So ask yourself in your work, to what extent are all these different dimensions, there are 14 of them, being fulfilled at your work, right? Yes, Priya, that is the big challenge, absolutely. And that's why we found working from home to be challenging, because the kind of relational self needs that were met when we came to work, interacted with colleagues, is missing, and met customers face to face is missing. That's why it's been a real challenge for us. I'd also add the psychological part. There's been a challenge there too. Our emotions in particular, because other people at some level stabilize our emotions, and working from home, we don't have that barometer in a way. So yes, Priya, absolutely. The relational self has come down by working from home. And Kumar, you've asked a question, go hand in hand with sales. That's a the answer is not a simple one. It's a much deeper answer. Having managed a number of sales teams, yes, I've in my experience found that in the long run, integrity absolutely benefits sales. Short term may not be so, but long run, absolutely. In the short term, you may get a deal, you may get an account, but it bites you in the longer term. It creates problems for you. Yes, digital at some level, but we also, and I'm answering questions by Rohit, well, digital workspace at some level, but we have that deep need to have human to human physical contact, physical in terms of person to person, the body contact, hugs and actually and so on, right? Okay, so one of you asked Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it's different from this approach. It draws from it, but it is different in many ways. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it was a hierarchy. You started with physiological needs, then you went to safety, then you went to belongingness and so on. In this model, the Beingful work model, there is no hierarchy. They're all important. You don't start with one and then you never can get enough of one. So you'll wait a long time. And that was the problem with the Maslow model. People did not go through those stages. All the research subsequently suggested people don't go through those stages because they can never fulfill completely any one of those. Second one is, this one is not meant for work. This is life in general, whereas the one here is meant for work. The Beingful work model is tailored to work, all the needs of work. Of course, since Maslow's times, a number of other issues have come up, such as the environment, such as positive contribution to society, such as the importance of customers and so on. All those Maslow was not aware of in that time, the 1950s when he developed it. So the Maslow model is an old one. But yes, I draw from it to some extent. Yes, Devi, absolutely. The higher self is an indicator of your calling. The higher self is a good indicator. The more you develop your higher self, the more you get a sense of your calling. And absolutely, the Chanakya Niti is extremely helpful, especially in the material and the psychological part. Chanakya Niti is really wonderful. A little less on the higher self and some aspects. It's very good in the relational side, but some aspects of it, clearly the environment was not an issue in Chanakya's time. Okay, so and then Virendra asks, Anmol asks a really important question, and that comes from the daily meds. The more you do daily meds, the more you begin to anchor in the witness. Okay, and great, meaningful Prof. Okay, and Yatnesh, what did you mean by, what did you find meaningful particularly? What about the whole self at work did you find meaningful? Go ahead, Yatnesh, unmute yourself. I'm not sure you guys can unmute, but go ahead, chat right down over there. But I'm going to move on because I have to show you some data. And this is the data I'm going to show you for the group, for many of you, about 180 of you, roughly about 180 of you filled out the survey. This is the model that I want you to examine more closely. If you can create a work environment for yourself and the people who report to you, where your focus is on fulfilling these needs as much as possible. The material needs, of course, is something that we all pay attention to. But going beyond that to the psychological needs, especially the relational needs and the higher needs. If you can do so, that is, pay explicit attention to it, have conversations with them about it, make it part of your SOPs, make it part of your evaluation, make it part of your own assessment. Did you do a good job or not? Make it part of your leadership coaching. It turns out that this needs fulfillment creates positive energy in employees and in yourself. And that's what, my experience in startups, working with companies and research suggests that needs fulfillment leads to real positive energy. That positive energy enables you to be more authentic at work and lead by authenticity, lead from your deepest self. That's what authentic leadership is described as, leading from a place of your deepest self, from your values and so on. Independent of the screwed up situation around you, you have more of an opportunity. This positive energy allows you to be more authentic at work. This positive energy also allows you to get more meaning from work in all the ways I described earlier. It also allows you to be more engaged at work. And these three in turn, being authentic, leading with authenticity at work, meaning at work, and engagement, affect your life as a whole. They actually improve your well-being. And what aspects especially? Your ability to flourish in life, be positive about the future. In this COVID crisis, for example, being positive about the future is a very hard thing, right? But it is very possible through work engagement, meaning at work, and being authentic. Very possible. And life flourishing is a very important aspect. It also leads to greater life satisfaction. You become more satisfied with your life. And finally, it leads to greater subjective happiness. Notice that I mentioned before, don't chase happiness directly. Chase it through meaning. And that's what this model is. If you want to be happy, if you want to be satisfied in your life, if you want your life to flourish, then find ways to get more meaning, be more authentic, and express your deepest self at work, and be more engaged with your work. How do you do it? By focusing on these needs and how to fulfill them. That applies to you and that applies to your employees. So that's the model. And let me now show you the data from all of you. About 182 people in the group filled out that survey. It was a long survey, so many of you didn't fill it out completely. I understand. But here's the data. And I have a bunch of data to show you, which I'll show you in the next 15 minutes. Then I'll take questions for about 10 to 15 minutes. But here's yes, Yathanesh, that's absolutely the point. It's meaningful in terms of finding connection with self and work. That is the whole core of being for work. Find that connection and how to understand it. So that comes with self-awareness, as I mentioned. So all the lessons here apply to making that connection. Yes, and then, so let me show you the data. So I asked you, what is your ideal work? What would be ideal for you? And notice, and this is in terms of which needs need to be fulfilled for your work to be ideal. And there seem to be 5 needs that matter the most to you, the 5 most important. When I say you, the average person in the group, 182, you individually might vary, but the average person will find your ambition. Absolutely. You're ambitious persons. I have people, I'm ambitious. We all are ambitious. That's a part of your material self. And that's an important part. So fulfilling that need of being ambitious, fulfilling your ambition is perhaps the second most important. For work to be ideal, it will fulfill your ambition needs. It's also important intellectual stimulation. This is the number one complaint I hear from many, many people on all levels. Your work is not stimulating intellectually. That's a big challenge. For much of work in the modern age, it has become intellectually non-stimulating. So this is a big part for you. You also want a lot of autonomy. And again, this often does not happen in your work. You have bosses who micromanage, your companies that control too much, or you yourself might not give enough autonomy to your people. Keep in mind that this is a very important fundamental need for people. Fulfilling their need for ambition, the intellectual stimulation, the need for autonomy, and of course, customers, serving customers. And I expect many of you come from industries where customer service is important. And most importantly, moral needs. I mentioned earlier, we live in a world that is corrupted. No doubt about it. We often are asked to do corrupt things. Even some of the questions here were exactly on that. But it is important to keep in mind that this is a fundamental need we have, moral need. We may fall, on the wayside, but this is a fundamental need for us. It goes back to our deepest self. It is a part of who we are. We want to do the right thing. It's the most important of all. So to the extent you create a work environment that meets these 5 needs, then you have a work environment that is very needs fulfilling. That then leads to everything else I mentioned: authenticity, meaning, engagement, and then well-being. Now let's look at the actual. Where are you currently? It turns out that almost every aspect you're way off from the ideal. You're quite, our work, unfortunately, not just you, our work, all of us, our actual work is quite a bit different from the ideal work. But look at the 5 most important things where it falls short. I'm looking at where the difference is the highest. Monitoring. Clearly our work doesn't pay us enough. And that may be one reason why you're perhaps even doing this GMP. For many of us, our work is not paying enough, doesn't meet our needs. Another one, ambition. That's a big gap there. And perhaps the GMP might help you there in terms of addressing your ambition. It also turns out that our work doesn't allow us to develop our personality. It forces us into a particular cookie cutter personality. So we can't express ourselves, the uniqueness that we have. That seems to be a big need. And intellectual. As I mentioned, a really big gap, perhaps the highest gap of them all in terms of not finding intellectual stimulation at work. Notice the difference between ideal and actual is 1.29 on a 1 to 7 scale, where 1 was extremely low and 7 was extremely high. These are called Likert scales. So these seem to be big. And then, of course, societal, having a positive impact on society and having a positive impact on the environment. So there are about 6 things that fall short in our work. And that's something as leaders we should pay attention to. How can we change it for ourselves? How can we change it for the people who report to us? Because when you do change it, here's what the data tells you. And this is the same chart. The blue is ideal, the red is actual. Notice the gap in every respect. Every respect, actual work falls short. And about 6 of them, it really falls short. It falls short in monetary, in terms of ambition, in terms of personality, in terms of intellectual needs, in terms of society, environment, and moral side. And why does this matter? Why does this matter? So this is a correlation table. Yes, admin, I absolutely expect that. GMP, I hope, will also go beyond your psychological and relational needs and address the higher needs, the higher self. That I feel is very important. As you can see, tomorrow. I can request someone to turn off their, Aman, if you could mute your microphone, please. Thank you. Yes, from the comment, yes, help us achieve your self-related goals. In my mind, that's the most important, moral values. Okay. Sapan, you ask a question that's interesting. It turns out there's a lot of research that suggests it's not so subjective. There's been research done on moral values, and it turns out across hundreds of different cultures, it actually is very consistent. So this is research on the true self. It turns out that hundreds of cultures, they value by and large the same thing. There are about a dozen such things that are considered morally right. So it's not as much variation as we expect. Cultures, by and large, conform to other cultures and valuing them. But I want to just spend a few minutes on this correlation table, and then I'll show. So this is the research part. And I will give you a quick 10-second introduction to correlations. Correlations are between 2 variables. If 2 variables are highly correlated, that means they vary together. If one goes up, the other also goes up. If one goes down, the other also goes down. That means they're positively correlated. If they're negatively correlated, they vary in opposite directions. If they're negatively correlated, if one goes up, the other goes down. If one goes down, the other goes up. If they're uncorrelated, then there's no relationship. Notice the very high positive correlations. Very high positive correlation. By the way, they range from -1 to 1. -1 is completely negatively correlated. +1 is completely positively correlated. So notice here, they're all very high, close to +1. And in particular, I want to draw your attention to this column here, meaning. Look at the correlation. I've been emphasizing meaning and authenticity. Look at the correlation between, first of all, meaning and your material needs fulfillment. If your material needs are fulfilled, then you're more likely to find your work meaningful. That's a high correlation. The more you meet your psychological needs or fulfill your psychological needs, very likely, highly likely to also find your work to be meaningful. If you can fulfill your relational needs, highly likely to find your work to be meaningful. Similarly, your higher self. So these are all very high correlations, which means the more you fulfill these needs I was talking about, material, psychological, relational, and higher, together they're called the whole self. It's very likely that your work will become very meaningful for you. That's the relationship between meaning and your needs. And meaning is even more correlated with authentic expression. The more you can express yourself authentically, the more you can express in ways that are consistent, aligned with the deep self, your sense of who you are at your core, that's a very high. Absolutely, Satish, all correlations are high, and they're very high. To be honest with you, that bothers me a little bit. They're very high, which means there's something else going on underneath that explains this kind of variation. But that's scope for future research. But notice the high correlation. The more you can express yourself authentically at work, then the more likely you'll find your work to be meaningful. Similarly, engagement, highly correlated. The more you are engaged at work, the more you'll find it meaningful, and vice versa. And notice the correlation between meaning and the well-being dimensions. The more you find your work to be meaningful, you will flourish in your life, more likely to flourish in your life. You'll likely find your life to be more satisfactory. You'll have higher satisfaction in your life. And importantly, you'll find your life to be happier. You'll find more happiness. Same kind of correlations apply to authentic leadership. Same things. If you look down this, the more you can express your work, the more you'll have meaning, the more you'll flourish in life, the more you'll be satisfied with life, the more you'll be happy in life. So in effect, this is the relationship, and this is called a path analysis. I'm going to end with this slide. This is the deeper analysis of the correlations. It's called a path analysis, and let me quickly explain what this is. This is called a causal model. This talks about which variable or construct or concept affects which one and how much so. Notice, beingful work is what I talked about, the needs fulfillment of the whole self at work. If you can fulfill the needs of your material self, your psychological self, your relational self, and the higher self, it has, and these numbers you see are called path coefficients. It has a path coefficient of 0.53 on meaning, 0.62 on authentic leadership, 0.42 on work engagement. What does a path coefficient mean? What it means is if you square this number, then that's the percentage of the variation in this variable that is explained by this variable. So this is considered an independent variable, and the arrow, the head of the arrow is the dependent variable. So the dependent variable is the variable that is affected by the independent variable. So the square of this number multiplied by 100 tells you how much of the variation in the dependent variable, in this case meaning at work, is explained by the independent variable, in this case beingful work. So if you square 0.5, that comes to 0.25. Multiplied by 100 is 25%. So what this tells is 25% of the meaning you find in your work is explained by beingful work. Similarly, 16% of work engagement, that is 0.42 squared, is about 16%, is explained by beingful work. And notice 36%, 0.6 squared, 36% of your ability to be authentic and express your deep self at work is explained by beingful work. That positive energy leads to all these wonderful things. You can be more yourself at work. Your work becomes more aligned with your values, your beliefs, your desires, and so on. Your work becomes more meaningful. Your work becomes more engaging. To this extent, 36% of authentic leadership is explained by beingful work. Similarly, notice authentic, being able to be authentic at work explains 16% of meaning, 0.4 squared, and 25% of work engagement. 0.49 is almost 0.5, square it, that is 25%. It's really 0.25 multiplied by 100 is 25%. And notice the impact eventually on your life. 0.25 is about, how much is that? 25, 6, 25, about 6%, right? 6% of your well-being explained by your meaning at work. About 1% is explained by your work engagement. What most explains your well-being is your authentic leadership at work, which again tells you the ability to be yourself in terms of leadership. Authentic leadership, or what I call beingful leadership, is extremely important to your well-being. It explains 0.66 is almost 0.7, right? 0.7 squared is 0.49. That is multiplied by 100 is almost 50%. 50% of your well-being in life is explainable by your ability to practice authentic leadership at work. And if you add up all these numbers, that becomes 60%. 60% of your life's well-being, your ability to flourish in life, your ability to be satisfied with your life, your ability to be happy with your life, 60% is explained by these concepts I was talking about, of which authenticity is the most important. So that's basically what I wanted to tell you. It's now 8:20. We have 10 more minutes for questions. To just quickly summarize, I'm going to go back to what we did, what we learned, the takeaways. Let me summarize the takeaways. We've covered quite a bit. Let me just summarize the takeaways. We learned about the 3-level leadership model, level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 1 is all about, of which I focused on sense of self. Level 2 is all about your work situation. And on that, I focused on beingful work. Level 3 was all about strategy and business models, which I didn't spend time on at all. Then I described the real leadership process and the key capabilities: recognition, experience, anchoring, and leadership. I talked of the importance of self-awareness, empathy, and the great difficulty of self-regulation. It's a very important one. And the most important of them all, which is integrity. That's the leadership competencies. Then I talked about the difference between happiness and meaning. And I said, based on research, don't pursue happiness directly. Pursue happiness through meaning. Meaning is a much more stable one. Meaning is much more giving-oriented. Meaning gives you a sense of identity. Happiness doesn't do any of those things. So the direct path to happiness is a dangerous path. That, by the way, is also described in the Kathopanishad. And I don't have time to give you that story. But yes, meaning is more important than happiness. Then I described the concept of beingful work. What does it mean to fulfill the needs of the whole self? And we saw the whole self as being composed of the material self, the psychological self, the relational self, and the higher self. And each of them had other dimensions, altogether about 14 of them. And if you could fulfill the needs of these 14 dimensions, then your work is beingful. Then I showed you the research from your own data, from about 182 of you, the relationship between beingful work, authentic leadership, meaning, engagement on your well-being, which I assume matters to us the most, especially in these COVID times. What matters most of all is our own well-being. And it turns out that 60% of your well-being can be explained by these variables, these concepts that I'm talking about in this class. The whole notion of beingful work and this impacts on authentic leadership, meaning, and engagement can explain 60%. And that's an extraordinary number. 60% of your happiness, your flourishing, and your life satisfaction can be explained by beingful work. And that's the data that I showed you. With that, I'm happy to take questions. I have about 7 minutes. Any questions? Go ahead, please. Yes, we do have a recording, but I'm happy to take questions. Please use the microphone, and I'm happy to both take a look at the website, to your chat box, and also to your questions. I'm happy to answer questions either from the chat session or from your microphone. Yes, self-regulation is very critical, because that's a very good question, by the way. Self-regulation is not the only driver of courage. Self-regulation gives you that strength of mind. Self-regulation is ultimately about strengthening your mind and your willpower. So self-regulation is about willpower, and willpower is directly linked to courage. Often people lose courage because they lose their willpower, and self-regulation affects our willpower. In the Isha Upanishad, the last line of the Isha Upanishad is Om Krato Smara Kratam Smara Krato Smara Kratam Smara. And that's a prayer to the will, our willpower to remember all that we have done. So in the end, beingful work leads to greater willpower. You do what you achieve your purpose. Okay. Krishna, I highly suggest looking at my Beingfulness website. There's a lot of stuff I've written there on the Upanishads, on beingfulness and the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, beingfulness and the Chandogya Upanishad, beingfulness and the Shakti tradition, beingfulness and Buddhism, beingfulness and Christianity, beingfulness and modern philosophy research, Heidegger and Deleuze, and a number of others. So please go ahead and look at that website. It really has hundreds of articles, Krishna.
What is the URL of the website? Can you type it?
Yes, let me type it, www.beingfulness.com. Let me type it again.
I'm not getting yet. Okay,
Yes, let me just type it.
Thank you.
And it has it has got a lot of stuff on Beingful Leadership. It's got a lot on Beingful Work. It's got a lot of philosophy. It's just, and there are lots of blogs and so on. So there's a lot of stuff there. How to develop self-discipline, the daily meds, Dinesh. I've tried many different things. Finally, daily meds has helped me. So that's the way to self-discipline or self-regulation. They mean the same thing. And Sushant, the question you're asking, need versus greed, is a very big one. It will need another 2 hours of a masterclass session. But that's how do you find your calling? Rashmi, that's my one regret. If I had one more hour here, I would have shown that tool called Karma Dharma. And there it's a way to find your calling. It's better than the Ikigai. Ikigai is what I used to teach a year ago. Since then, I developed a tool called Karma Dharma, the purpose of your work. But that takes about an hour to do. So that's something that hopefully I'll do in the personal leadership session. I'll be teaching the personal leadership module, and I will spend time on how to find your calling. In the end, it comes down to that, how to find your calling. So I'll use that tool. Unfortunately, there's not enough time to do that here. And I'm looking at refining the decision making. We can stretch, please. Can you? Okay, integrity is same as morality. Morality is one key aspect of integrity, but integrity is also some other things. Morality is a deeper concept. There are many things related to morality. Integrity is more a consistency between thought and action. Morality is not just that. Morality is what you think also. Integrity is about consistency between thought and action. From your mind to your heart to your action.
Professor Ram?
Yes, go ahead, please.
It's Anthony Lafredo. It's a pleasure to meet you again, and thank you for a great session. It's wonderful to hear your voice. Question is, will we be getting or receiving a copy of this deck? Because it is just packed full of information that I would just love to review and research.
Okay.
Just a great question.
I'm going to check with our GMP and but you'll have the recording. Yes, let me check with GMP and find out on that, follow up on that, right?
Thank you, sir.
Yes. And any books of yours, Rashmi, I actually have summarized my book on the website. So for each chapter in my actual book, there's a summary of that book on the website. So the book site website has a whole section called Beingful Leadership, which is a summary of my book. And by the way, I'm trying to organize a conference on beingfulness next year. I'm happy to, those of you who would like to, I'm assuming I'll get your emails. I'll send an email to you. And those of you who would like to, help in that, you're most welcome. And to stay connected with me, I'm happy to do that. Okay. There's clearly some questions.
Hi, Professor Ram.
Professor, if I may ask. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Professor Ram.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Hi, this is Shubha here. I'm from Honeywell.
Okay. Go ahead, Shubha. Go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is like, in this competitive world and being a diversity employees, most of the time I feel that there is a little bit biasness is there from the management side or from the peers and colleagues side. So my another question is that, okay,
bias towards, don't just say bias towards what you would say. Not being inclusive, not being
towards bias.
Okay, sure.
Yes, in the inclusive side actually.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So my question is that being a great manager is that's different. Definitely, I mean we should be having managerial skill. But what do you suggest that in this competitive world, is it like technically also we have to be strong? So how do you suggest that technical side and managerial side, how it goes with hand in hand?
Yes. So as you notice clearly here, I didn't spend much on the technical side, right? The technical side, there are lots of techniques. I mean, that's something that, especially in India, there are many ways to get stronger technically. I think the challenge in leadership in India and other countries, India and the US, which is where I spent many years, is the other side. What you mentioned, the biases, right? So there are many, many biases. In particular, you could argue there are about 128 different cognitive biases, as they're called. These are biases in the way we think and the attitudes we have that we're not even aware of. So this particular approach, beingful leadership, emphasizes, as I mentioned, self-awareness. And one important part of self-awareness is to be aware of your biases. So I do a lot of cases and classes where we try and identify our biases, because and they're by and large cognitive biases. So once we become more aware of ourselves and how others perceive us, then we have a better handle on our biases. And I absolutely believe that's a good place to begin, to know where we are making assumptions that should not be made. They're the elephants in the room. And to be aware of the elephants in the room, you begin with self-awareness. Those capabilities I described, self-awareness, empathy is a way to reduce bias, for example. Empathizing with the weak, the underprivileged, people of a different gender, people who normally don't get included, people who are marginalized. I have some of the research that I do on marginalized stakeholders. How could boards of directors include them? And this is a very important part, the empathy and so on. How do you enable them to be included also, to be more inclusive? So yes, being full leadership is all about becoming more inclusive and reduce those biases.
Sir, a quick question.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay. Sir, your thoughts on love what you do or keep finding what you love. There, I see a lot of dissatisfaction in people, most people regarding job for one parameter or other.
Yes,
especially in mid-career, right? So what do you suggest, sir?
Okay, so you ask a very good question, and that's something I spent 20, 30 years wandering around, thinking that I should find my love, right? That it is out there waiting to be discovered and I should find it. I learned that that's not true. That in some ways, and I don't particularly teach, I didn't teach it here in this particular masterclass, but there's a whole body of work called crafting, job crafting. And that's something that I teach in the longer session. Job crafting teaches you how to love what you do. So you may have a piece of work or you're doing something that it may not be meaningful, but there are many ways to make it meaningful and to make it more lovable. And that's called job crafting. And there are a variety of ways: attitude crafting, task crafting, relationship crafting, identity crafting. It takes about half an hour to an hour to explain it, but that's something I highly suggest. What you have with you, try and make it more meaningful and lovable. And then from that, you learn about yourself. So do that. So it's a combination of the two. Don't keep searching for that kind of mystical, that one true love of my life. It doesn't work in love affairs. It doesn't work in relationships, and it doesn't work in work, professional work. We have great ability to adapt and find love in different places. And that's what job crafting is all about. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, sir. Any specific book, if you can suggest, or course?
Okay. And the book is called, yes, this whole book that I mentioned called Make Your Job Your Calling.
Okay.
Talks a lot about job crafting. In fact, the authors of that book were pioneers in that research.
Thanks, sir. I really appreciate it.
And if you look up on the web, just type in job crafting. There are lots of articles on it talking about how to love what you do, how to find meaning in what you do. So that's something I teach in the personal leadership course. It's a very important thing. Yeah, so like love, it's not one unique true love in your life. You can create it, you can discover it and enact it. Other questions? With that, go ahead, please.
Yeah, good evening, Professor. This is Kunal Malhotra.
Kunal,
my question is specifically with regard to family-run business.
Okay.
Would you recommend a family business leadership program at ISB, or this you feel the GMP would be something which would be beneficial also as an owner, as a family business owner?
Right. So, we do have a family business program. I think you may be aware of the family business program.
I'm aware of it.
So what I would recommend is, so the GMP is for senior leaders, right? People with many years experience, people with the kind of maturity at some level to do that. So I would recommend that definitely, because it gives you the perspective. But then the family business program gives you much more of the details of how to run a business. So that too is a good one, but that gives you the technical, operational, managerial skills. This one gives you more of the leadership at a higher level. So if you can do both, absolutely. If you're forced to choose, then I guess you have to evaluate. Would you want to be focused only on family business, or you want these general management skills? And the choice is yours.
Great. Thank you very much. Lovely session. Thank you for the same.
Good evening, Professor. I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, during my career span, there has always been a conflict between, when I am being authentic or being integral, somewhere creates a conflict or a contradiction with my diplomacy. And sometimes calling a spade is a huge issue.
Yes.
How do we tackle with that?
It's a very good question. I used to be like that in the past. I used to mistake integrity for frankness. But I think we have to, that's why I mentioned the empathy part, right? When you couple empathy with this integrity, then you're also diplomatic while being straightforward. And that's not a contradiction. You could actually, and so there are ways to do so. So you're not just being, many people are rude and they say I'm rude because I'm honest, but they're not considerate of other people's feelings also. So you have to try to be both. Understand that actually it's also not effective. When you are at that level, let's say impolite or perceived to be impolite, people's defenses go up and they're not going to listen to what you say. It's as if they've drawn up the moat bridge. The bridge has gone up, the wall has gone up. Whatever you say will not go through. So it is smart to be polite, to be respectful, to be diplomatic while also speaking the truth. It is very possible to do so. And there are many ways to do so. One way is to be vulnerable. There are ways to do it, but it's not a contradiction. It can be bridged. And many people make the mistake of saying that I am impolite or rude or whatever it is, just because I want to be frank. But ultimately that's caring only about themselves. They're not caring about the other person too. So if they want real change, then you should combine respectfulness with beingfulness. Does that answer the question?
Professor, being polite and being respectful is inclusive, but still putting the facts on the table and still creating a contradiction. That is the main issue. Like, it's not like it's been stated in an impolite or a disrespectful manner, but sometimes the fact itself, it creates a contradiction, like stating a fact.
Understand. No, I understand. But I actually feel even before you get there, it may not be a problem for you, but for many people, and it was a problem for me in my early years, the form in which I said something was even more important than the content. That creates problems. How you communicate often is a bigger problem than what you communicate. So you have to care about how and the form. And then the point you made, let's say you were careful about the form, how you communicated, but the facts are inconvenient, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the point you're making. Then there are a number of other things. Then how do you present the facts? Do you present them? Because there we run into a bias called the confirmation bias. And that's very important to know. If I believe something, then I will look at those facts in a different way from the way you're looking at it. So facts are not absolute. Your facts are used to reinforce or confirm the mental model you already have. That is why two people can look at the same facts and come to different conclusions, because the mental models are different. So once you recognize that, then you have to try and change their mental models. Just giving them facts will not be enough. The same fact will be interpreted different ways by different people. And I'm sure you come across that, right?
Yeah.
That's important to recognize. It's called confirmation bias. And if you read it up, there's a lot of information on how to deal with confirmation bias. Human beings try to confirm what is already inside them. In fact, there's some great research that suggests that our reason is only a tool for our feelings and emotions, that it's there to explain our feelings and emotions, and it's not their master. In fact, our emotions and feelings are our master, and our reason is only a tool. One final question, and I'm happy to close the session. I know we took a 10-minute break, so I'm sort of extending it by a few minutes.
Sir, this is Sapan Shah. Can I ask the question, sir?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Go ahead, please.
Sir, you mentioned about job crafting, and my question is, sir, I most of the time feel that what I'm doing is not my passion, and I have a passion for something else. But I'm deeply into my business, and I'm a Generation X. So when I started my work, there wasn't much choice or passion involved in starting a business. But now I'm into my business for more than 25 years, and now most of the time there is a calling that my passion is not this.
And what do you say your calling is? What do you want to?
Sir, I want to help people and sort of coach people and make their life better, or sort of inspire people to do better things, financially, business.
I completely understand. I mean, that was also my part of my calling. And I want to tell you also, many entrepreneurs feel that way. I talk to hundreds of entrepreneurs, and many of them have and many would say that they would like to teach in schools, high schools, change the nature of education, because they know that's where it makes a difference, middle school, high school, right? So really, and that's a whole different session on that. What you need to do, this is my big lesson in life, I want to mention to you. Don't leave your job and do something else, especially your business. First, for about a year or two, try and find the intersection. Try and find the sweet spot where when you say, I want to help people, what exactly do you mean? When you want to coach people, what exactly do you mean? And see if you can do it through your current work. Especially since you own your own business, you have a lot more control on how you do your business, at least your work. See if through your current work, you coach and teach and help people. Then you learn a lot about that. You may find that you may not like it, that people don't like to be coached, or people are not so helpful, or people are not the way you expect them to be. So you may get disappointed. Better be disappointed in your current work rather than give up your current work and be disappointed. So my first suggestion to everyone in every program, based on my own life's mistakes, is in your current work, try and see if you can meet the core need that you're trying to meet. When you say you want to coach, what exactly do you mean? Can you do it in your current work? Learn through your current work. If you're working in a company, learn through the company's resources. Once you're sure, and once you've taken care of the financial side, which is another big topic, once you're willing to take the risk and your family put them through the risk, which is another big topic, only then leave and pursue your passion. But my sense is the way you described it, I think it's doable through your work. You just have to do some harder thinking.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I think it'll be very helpful for me.
This is Mamta, sir. I have a question too. Can I probably be the last person to ask the question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. How do you strike a balance between the employees, the team, and the management when people see you as a management's person, but then you have to be with the team and work for them, with them, and they still see you as a person from the management? That becomes a challenge.
Right? As a stooge of management. Yeah, this is a big challenge for many people because you are seen as really a chamcha, management's chamcha, to put it bluntly, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's be blunt. We've all been there. We've been in that situation. We are seen as people who are just taking orders from management and implementing it. Yeah. They just
as sometimes we don't speak to the management for a couple of days also, but then still we are seen like people from their side. So how do we strike a balance?
So in many ways, I'll tell you the best one, right?
Yeah,
so Google did some research on this topic. Not exactly this topic, but they looked at who are the most effective team leaders. I also teach a whole course on team leadership, and this question comes up often. And they identified the top 8 competencies of team leaders. Guess what was number 1? Absolute number 1, which is an answer to you. Anyone? Anyone? What do you think the number 1 competency or capability of a team leader is? Anyone? Based on thousands of projects that they've analyzed, extremely analytical.
People management.
So it's not so much in terms of these. So I'm differentiating between the capabilities I talked about and leadership competency. So you actually, Kishore, what did you say? What you said, Kishore Sama, go ahead, please, because that was number 1. Kishore, go ahead. Can you use the microphone?
I'm sorry, I've already attended your session. Like I'm a god of 2022.
You already know
I've
that.
seen your video, sir.
Okay, so the answer is coaching. Be a coach to your people. So my answer to you is spend time coaching the members in your team. Get to know them personally. Get to know their aspirations. Get to know what they care about. Their purpose. Go through that. And once you do that, you will be seen as someone who's their well-wisher and not a stooge of management, not a chamcha. Coaching is the answer to this. Of course, there are many other answers. Leading by example is one, but coaching is a direct way to do it. Spend time with them individually and understanding them, understanding their aspirations, what do they care about beyond the work. Then they will see you as a well-wisher for them. And that's something you probably are not doing enough of. And does that answer your question, Mamta?
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, though I'm doing that, but then, yeah, not to that greater extent. Yeah.
A lot more till they see you as you're watching my back.
Right.
Yeah, and understand their aspirations. Why are they doing this job? What are their goals in life? What are the struggles they're having? What are their challenges and issues and so on? Once you do that, coaching is number 1. It's the number 1 team leadership capability. In a highly technical company like Google, across their thousands of projects, this is the answer. Number 1 is coaching. Be a coach to your members. With that, I want to thank you all. It's been a wonderful session. I hope we still have about 165. I didn't expect that many to stay back. Thank you all very much, and good luck to you and all the best to you. In touch with you later to take this.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for
Thank you,
that
everyone.
insightful
Thank you
session.
so much, Professor.
Thank
I
you.
will request
Thank
Sridevi
you.
to give the word of thanks.
Thank you very much.
Brain massage. I think
Details of the please let us know or drop in a note at cee@isb.edu. We'll be happy to help you with the details.
And I also want to emphasize, I'm just one of many professors. There's some really outstanding profs over here. These are my gurus in a way. So there are a bunch of them, many. There's a professor called D.V.R. Seshadri. Wonderful. Actually, many of the profs in this program are outstanding professors. So do, if you can, do get their experience. See how they teach. They're truly.
Professor Ram. Thank you so much.
They're my role models. Thank you, Selena. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for
Thank you, sir.
attending.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sridevi.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Ram.
Take care then. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Good luck to you.
Good night.
All the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and sorry for that glitch.